The Welsh are not English. Their DNA proves it. And what they actually are is older than the country sitting next to them. For most of the last 1500 years, the British Isles were sold to you as one story. Romans came. Saxons came. Normans came. A single island absorbed by waves of new people. And the Welsh became a footnote, a regional accent, a flag at a rugby match. But a few years ago, scientists pulled hundreds of ancient bodies out of medieval cemeteries across England and the North Sea coast. They read every genome inside them. And the numbers came back saying something the chronicles had never admitted. The English were replaced. The Welsh were not. We have to walk into a stone cemetery in Cambridgeshire and ask who buried men there with weapons their own island had never forged. We have to read the blood of a Roman soldier in northern England and ask how a man in Roman armor ended up carrying the bone of a place he had never lived. And above all, we have to look at a wall built 800 years before the Norman conquest and ask why that wall still shows up inside a genome printout today. It starts on an island that had already been conquered 3 times, before the word England existed. There is a place west of Birmingham called Powys. Today it is a quiet Welsh county. Green hills, stone churches, grazing sheep. In the 8th century, it was a kingdom. The king of Powys had a problem. To his east, just over the River Severn, sat the most aggressive military state in the British Isles, the Anglo-Saxon kingdom of Mercia. The Mercians wanted his land. They had been taking it, decade by decade, for 2 centuries. So around the year 785, the king of Mercia, a man named Offa, gave an order. Build a wall. From sea to sea. Cut across the mountains. Not a defensive fort. A line on a map made of dirt. Officially, a frontier. Unofficially, a sentence. Everything east of the wall belonged to England. Everything west of the wall was Wales. If you grew up west of that line, or any of your grandparents did, this wall is not history. It is the reason your bloodline looks the way it does. Look at a map of Britain right now. The line is still on it. Almost no one notices it anymore. The Welsh held their language. The Welsh held their kings. The Welsh held their churches. And, as the bones would eventually reveal, the Welsh held their bloodline. The archaeologists who walked that wall came to a simple conclusion about it. The Mercians did not build Offa's dike to attack. They built it to admit defeat. The Welsh kingdoms were not going to fall. The wall was Mercia accepting it. But there is a deeper question hiding under that wall. Why were the Welsh kingdoms standing at all? The Saxons had taken everything else. From Kent to the Pennines, every other British kingdom collapsed. The names disappeared. The languages disappeared. The kings disappeared. In the West, none of that happened. The mountains stayed Welsh. The valleys stayed Welsh. The blood stayed Welsh. The answer is not in the chronicles. The answer is in 7 Roman skeletons that were buried in a cemetery outside the city of York 1800 years ago. When somebody finally read their genomes, 6 of the 7 turned out to belong to a place those men had never lived. Hold that image. 7 Roman graves. 6 of them in the wrong country. We will come back to them in a moment, and you are going to know exactly where they should have been buried. But first, you need to understand how Britain became a layered house. If you have ever walked into an old house, you already know how genetics works. Somebody built a stone room. Somebody added a wooden floor on top. Somebody painted plaster over the wood. The house you walk into today is only the last layer. But if you scrape the plaster, the wood is still there. If you lift the wood, the stone is still there. A modern population is the same. It is the last coat of paint on a wall that has been painted many times. The interesting question is never who is at the surface. The interesting question is who is still under it. In Britain, the painting started over again, and the Welsh are the only group on the island where you can still see the second-to-last coat. To find that coat, we have to walk backward, fast, through the deepest part of the house. Before the Romans, Britain had already been a hunter-gatherer forest. Then a Neolithic farmland brought across the sea from the place we now call Turkey. 2 populations. 2 replacements. Stonehenge was built by the farmers, not by the men who came before them. And then, around 4,500 years ago, the wall got painted again, harder than ever before. A new culture poured out of Central Europe, bell-shaped pottery, bronze daggers, a new kind of burial. Archaeologists call them the bell beaker. When a team at Harvard sequenced the bones from this period and ran the numbers for Britain specifically, the answer came out cleanly. At least 9 out of every 10 people on the island were replaced. Read that again. The people who built Stonehenge were almost entirely replaced. The stones stayed standing. The bloodlines did not. By the Bronze Age, Britain was a beaker island. Steppe ancestry, ultimately from the open grass north of the Black Sea. And the dominant male bloodline, passed father to son to son to son, was a single genetic signature that arrived with the beaker men. It is still the dominant male bloodline in modern Wales, almost unchanged 4,000 years later, as if something had been protecting it. Across the Bronze Age that followed, new arrivals from across the Channel kept pouring in. By the time the Romans landed, the people on the island were a layered Iron Age population. Anatolian farmer, deep below. Beaker steppe, the dominant coat. And a thinner coat of Bronze Age ancestry from across the Channel, the migration that probably carried the early Celtic languages onto the island. If that last layer is what carried Celtic into Britain, then the Welsh language, Cymraeg, is the long echo of a coastline that no longer remembers it. These are the Britons the Romans met. Tacitus named them. The people who painted themselves blue and refused to surrender at Anglesey. And we know exactly what they looked like genetically, because somebody dug up the bones of 7 of them in that Roman cemetery near York and read the entire genome. When the bones were sequenced, 6 of the 7 came back, showing a clear genetic affinity. Not with Yorkshire. Not with Eastern England. With modern Wales. A Roman soldier buried in northern England 1,800 years ago was closer to a man from Cardiff than to a man from the same English county where he was buried. That should not be possible. Unless something happened between then and now that erased the man from York, but failed to erase the man from Cardiff. Something did happen. And it has a name. A few years ago, a team in Cambridge collected ancient DNA from hundreds of early medieval skeletons across England. Cambridgeshire, Kent, the east coast of Yorkshire, cemeteries from the centuries that came after Rome collapsed, the exact window during which, according to the chronicles, the Anglo-Saxons arrived. The chronicles described it as a small, elite migration. A few warriors, a handful of mercenaries. Most modern textbooks were quietly suggesting the Anglo-Saxon invasion was mostly cultural. The Britons stayed. They just learned to speak Old English. That story is now dead. The numbers came back. In eastern England, the early medieval population derived up to 3/4 of its ancestry from one single source. The populations along the German and Danish coast. 3/4. That is not a cultural shift. That is a population takeover. And this is the part that matters for the Welsh. When the same team tried to model the modern English, they could not make the math close without 3 different ancestry sources mixed together. Saxon, Old Britain, and a thinner ancient layer from across the Channel. When they modelled the modern Welsh, they did not need any of that complexity. Modern Welsh genomes can be explained almost entirely by the people who were already on the island before the Romans ever came. Almost no Anglo-Saxon admixture is needed to make the math close. So when you look at a modern man in Cardiff and a modern man in Norwich, and they both speak the same language, and they both watch the same football, you are looking at two people whose genomes diverged 1300 years ago. One of them is mostly the Briton the Romans met. The other is mostly the man who arrived after Rome left. The two of them have been pretending to be the same country for 1,000 years. The interesting question is how the smaller one held out. So how does this happen on a small island? Three things stopped the Anglo-Saxon wave at the Welsh border. The first is geography. The west of Britain is mountains. Snowdonia, the Cambrians, the Brecon Beacons. Mountain warfare in the 6th century was prohibitive. The eastern lowlands fell. The western highlands did not. The second is political. The Britons in the west reorganized. They formed kingdoms. Powys, Gwynedd, Dyfed. These kingdoms had armies, they had kings, they had the memory of Rome to draw on, and they did not break. The third is the wall. The wall did not stop a single battle that we know of. But it did stop the slow seepage of population that, in eastern Britain, had already done the damage. And there was a fourth factor. Slower, harder to see. Language. Brythonic, the ancestor of modern Welsh, did not just survive in the West. It was preserved as a literary language, a legal language, a religious language. In the early medieval kingdoms, Welsh was the language of the court. The Saxons could conquer a valley. They could not conquer a poem. A Welsh historian once said something simple about this. The Welsh language did not survive because the mountains protected it. The mountains survived because the language defended them. And if you have a Welsh-speaking grandparent in your family, or if your last name still carries a syllable that you have stopped explaining to people, look at it now. That syllable in front of your surname is a paint stripe from the wall under the wall. But none of this answers the deeper question. If the Welsh are the surviving Britons, who exactly were the Britons? This is where the modern Welsh inherit something that the modern English do not. The Britons that the Romans met were already a layered people. Anatolian farmer ancestry, deep below. Steppe ancestry from the Beaker men, the dominant coat. A thinner Bronze Age Celtic coat from across the Channel. The Welsh are not a pure indigenous population. There is no such thing. But they are the only place on the British mainland where all those layers are still legible, where the male bloodline of the Beaker men still dominates at almost the same frequency it had 4,000 years ago, where the maternal lines trace back to Iron Age cemeteries in the west of the island. The English carry pieces of this too. Underneath the Anglo-Saxon paint, the older layers are still there. But absorbed is not the same as preserved. Once you are absorbed, you stop being a distinct genetic signal. You become a percentage in someone else's chart. The Welsh are not a percentage. The Welsh are a continuous line. When a different team of scientists looked at 2,039 grandparents from rural Britain, the first group of people that genetically separated from everyone else after the islands in the far north was the Welsh. Not the Scottish, not the West Country, the Welsh. And then the Welsh themselves split north from south. A small island has rarely held two distinct genetic clusters, side by side, that long. The Welsh are not a regional variant of the English. They are a different people standing right next to them. And if your family has a Welsh surname, or your grandparents grew up on the western side of that line, the chart you are looking at every time someone calls you simply British is not the chart that applies to you. You are reading the wrong file. A few honest words, because this is science and not myth. The Anglo-Saxon line did not stop perfectly at Offa's Dyke. Welsh genomes still carry some continental admixture. English genomes still carry deep British ancestry. The point is not that the line is absolute. The point is that the line exists. After the last few years of ancient DNA work, that line is no longer a theory. It is a peer-reviewed gradient running diagonally across an island. What you do with that gradient is up to you. A wall built in 785. A Roman soldier buried in York whose bones speak Welsh. 6 of 7 graves where they should not be. 3/4 of an English coastline that was no longer British. 2,039 grandparents who only sorted into one shape. These are not separate problems. They are one mechanism. The next time you look at a map of the United Kingdom on a shop wall, and your eye runs over that small western peninsula labelled Wales in the same font as everything else, understand that the font is lying to you. The cartographers in London made the British Isles look like one country. The genome printout from a Welsh village makes the British Isles look like 2 countries, pretending to be one for 1,300 years. The wall is still there. It just stopped being made of dirt. The Welsh are not English. If you are still here at the end of this video, you already knew something didn't add up. The accent, the name, the grandparent who wouldn't quite let go of a language nobody else spoke, the flag at the rugby match that always looked older than the flag at the football. The next file is the one this community has been asking me to open for weeks. British surnames and the bloodlines they carry without you ever being told. I will see you there.